Hi everybody, you are listening to the Medea podcast series. Medea Medical Education Academy is a global medical education provider dedicated to designing, delivering and evaluating medical education programs worldwide. Today we are going to speak with Professor Antonio Ceriello, head of the Diabetes Department at MultiMedica, Milan, Italy, about screening for type 2 diabetes. This podcast is part of the continuing medical education program entitled Blended Learning Journey on Diabetes and Pre-Diabetes. The target audience for this program is clinicians involved in endocrinology, particularly diabetes, pre-diabetes, fertility and pregnancy management, obesity management, and general practice.
Welcome, everybody. I am Professor Antonio Ceriello from Milan, Italy, and I'm currently working research consultant at the IRCC MultiMedica in Milan, Italy. My background is of diabetologist, and in this way, I have been widely involved in the research on diabetes and complications, but also particularly on what means prediabetes and its possible complications. At the moment, I think that is of interest that I am chairing the International Diabetes Federation new guidelines, which will be particularly relevant, being settled to different levels, the best and the minimum, as well on a new position statement aiming to identify earlier the risk to develop diabetes. So meaning to an early possibility to diagnose pre-diabetes and also, of course, diabetes. So, together we'll spend almost 15 minutes in order to share some thoughts that at the end of this podcast, you can be introduced to identify patients at high risk for prediabetes and diabetes and know to arrange screening to confirm suspicions and also to counsel by patients at high risk for prediabetes and diabetes about lifestyle change, diet, exercise, body weight, stress, and about medication and other options which can be useful to fight prediabetes.
How can those at risk of type 2 diabetes be identified? Do you advocate population screening, and if so, when should it be done?
I think that it's very important to make a couple of premises according to what is going as important news. First of all, I think that this will impact a lot. We cannot speak anymore about pre-diabetes. The WHO, the World Health Organization, has decided to change this kind of definition for people who are predisposed to develop diabetes. And now we speak about intermediate hyperglycemia. I think that this concept is quite relevant. Why? Because the idea is to avoid the word diabetes, which means sometimes to have a kind of sort of stigma about the disease, opening the heart to the possibility to be back to a normal position, situation, meaning that to be again back to have a normal glucose metabolism. So this new definition of intermediate hyperglycemia has been also adopted by the International Diabetes Federation and of course, I believe will be adopted also by the most important scientific societies in the world like the ADA, the ESD, Canadian Diabetes Association, British Diabetes Association, and do not forget, of course, Chinese Diabetes Association, considering that China is unfortunately contributing with a higher number of people with diabetes in the world. How can we screen for an early diagnosis? Because the idea of an early diagnosis of, let's say, of intermediate hyperglycemia as well as diabetes is really very important for practical stuff. As I told you, that the WHO wish to define intermediate hyperglycemia and not the prediabetes, with the hope that somebody can be back to normalize glucose metabolism. But to do this, the need is to identify people at risk as soon as possible, of course. In this way, there are new perspectives because, again, the IDF, the International Diabetes Federation, is suggesting to change the criteria for the diagnosis of intermediate glycemia as well of diabetes, and to use the value of 1 hour during an oral glucose tolerance test instead of the value of 2 hours during an oral glucose tolerance test for the diagnosis. This position statement has been already published, has been developed by a large number of experts, and of course revised also by other experts, and approved by the International Board of the International Diabetes Federation. The aim of this new criteria of 1 hour postprandial glucose, or much better 1 hour oral glucose tolerant test value of glycemia, is to really, according to the evidence, to have an earlier diagnosis compared to utilize A1C or 2 hour value of glycemia during GTT. Of course, this does not mean, unfortunately, that we can improve the visibility of a screening action. Why? Because an OGTT, of course, 2 hours is too long, but also 1 hour is enough long to discourage people to do something like this. A1C does not work well. There are many papers suggesting this. So for screening purposes, probably these are not yet, or not never will be, good tools. Probably at the level of the population, the best is to use a questionnaire. There are some validated questionnaires. One of them, the most relevant, the most used, is the FINRISK questionnaire, which, using 9 questions, can give a score, and according to the value of your score, somebody can be considered at high risk of developing diabetes, of course also dysglycemia, like intermediate hyperglycemia, and then after this first step, the person can go to have further evaluation. Of course, it's very useful because screening in a very simple way like this, we will be able to really reduce the number of people to test in a more accurate way.
How does low socioeconomic status impact diabetes management?
There is evidence that one of the most important risk factors for developing diabetes and also its complication is the low socioeconomic status, which very often is combined with the low literacy level. Unfortunately, it's not difficult to understand why. People with less economic possibility and also less educated, they have a lifestyle which is not healthy at all, very, very often. For example, during my stay in UK, I worked in UK for some years, I saw that very often people were having as lunch hamburger at McDonald's with French fries and Coca-Cola. This was for at least 6 days a week, their lunch. Maybe once this kind of food can be once, let's say, once a week, but less. This kind of food can be accepted, but as a lifestyle, of course, cannot be. And this is just an example that I was living personally to explain why a lifestyle really impacts on the possibility of easily develop diabetes. Because the lifestyle is the key in controlling the gaining weight, which occurs is easily inducing the appearance of diabetes. The lifestyle also is very often accompanied by less physical exercise, if not at all, and the combination of unhealthy food, unhealthy diet, and low exercise is really the worst situation for the development of diabetes. You know, gaining weight, eating this kind of foods, poor in vegetables, fruit, and rich in fats and carbohydrates, not only is in favoring gaining weight, but particularly is impacting on insulin, producing insulin resistance and leading, of course, in time to over diabetes. So at the level of a population is very important. It's a strategy, but cannot be a individual strategy. It's very important that we improve the knowledge of the people about of this. But of course, this is also a government duty, meaning to improve the socioeconomic situation of people, not favoring job, good job, but also creating the opportunity for exercise would be very, very relevant to have the possibility to have, for example, to have a physical exercise, to run around your home and not needing to move in another part of the city just to do this, because many people will be too lazy or even be difficult because of their job to do this. So it's we able to redesign as a community a different situation, favoring healthy food, healthy diet, but also favoring the possibility to have a lifestyle without so many barriers.
What is the evidence that identifying and supporting those with prediabetes or diabetes makes a long-term difference to their health and well-being?
First of all, if you are able to intervene at the level of prediabetes slash intermediate hyperglycemia, it's very relevant because you can avoid the appearance of over diabetes. So this is the first important step. But because we now are really very well aware that the intermediate hyperglycemia is also connected not only to high risk of developing diabetes, but also to the many other comorbidities. You can have a situation of a dysglycemia or higher glucose tolerance or intermediate hyperglycemia, which is accompanied at the same time by high risk of developing cardiovascular disease and nephropathy, which are both very serious comorbidities. Because, of course, we are very aware that one can lead to have very serious events like myocardial infarction, stroke, or cardiovascular death. The other one, nephropathy, can also lead to need of have dialysis. The problem also emerging in the last years is that the kidney and the heart, they have a crosstalk, and very often, if one is damaged, also the other one will follow. So usually, if you have a damage at the kidney level, this will be soon accompanied by damage at the level of the cardiovascular system and vice versa. These new aspects are now receiving a lot of attention. I want just to stress that at the recent European Renal Association Congress, there was a session specifically dedicated to the problem of early dysglycemia, prediabetes, and the risk of nephropathy. And at the end of August, the European Society of Cardiology is already planning a specific symposium regarding the impact of early dysglycemia, pre-diabetes on cardiovascular disease. So this is not only something which now is interested in the expert in metabolism, but is starting to be of great interest also for nephrologists and cardiologists, meaning that the problem is so relevant, so important, that no one specialist or no one kind of doctor can ignore it. Of course, what means to act? To act means that if you identify somebody at high risk, already having intermediate hyperglycemia or a very early stage of the diabetes, it's very important to act, improving, changing the lifestyle. And if this does not work, we are quite lucky to have evidence suggesting that we have drugs, particularly one very well known is metformin, which is really able to tackle these conditions. You know, we have studies, and also it's very important that we have studies not only for patients, but also, for example, in Chinese patients or Asian people are completely different in terms of what is producing diabetes in them. One is more related to insulin resistance, the other one more to defect in insulin secretion. But at the end of the day, it has been shown that higher in Caucasian and more recently also in Chinese, that the treatment with metformin particularly can prevent to develop diabetes. But also it's very relevant to one recent study again performed in China showing that if you compare a lifestyle intervention to a lifestyle intervention plus metformin, you gain more benefit when metformin is added to lifestyle changes. So means that we have to start to think that, of course, lifestyle is really a pillar of the management of early stage of diabetes or intermediate hyperglycemia, but the use of a drug like metformin should be considered also as early as possible, because adding this drug improves a lot the possibility to prevent the diabetes appearance, and particularly the comorbidities like nephropathy and cardiovascular disease.
Do you think that teaching students at school about the importance of food, how they eat and what they eat, could also be a long-term solution for reducing diabetes?
I think that this is the key in many societies. Maybe you know the campaign of Mrs. Obama. She did in the United States. It was quite successful in trying to change the habit of food intake in adolescents in the States, because this generation is more exposed than the previous one. It seems a paradox, but this is the truth, because this generation is more exposed to this kind of bad lifestyle and will be exposed for longer term than the others, because this generation is starting very often to have this kind of approach, while the other generation, we started later. In this way, all the other generations also were starting later compared to the last one. So this is the best strategy, also because there is a possibility through the school to reach directly this subject. What I mean, when you start a campaign for the prevention of the disease, and then you use the usual tools like press campaigns, TV campaigns, we do not know how many and who you are reaching. But if you do this kind of campaign very well organized in the school, you exactly know who you are reaching. Moreover, also you know exactly the age of the people, and this is the age, very important, get some possible improvements in years.
What take-home messages do we have at the end of this podcast?
The take-home message is that it's mandatory for everybody to think about the risk of developing diabetes and to risk that you are already at risk of developing diabetes and to check what is the situation and anyhow to think and to act in changing your lifestyle in order to have a very good lifestyle and to eat the right food and to have enough physical exercise. This never will produce damage, or anyhow will be good. But think, nobody can be free from this kind of risk continuing the lifestyle we have assumed in the last year. So be careful and take care of yourself.
Thank you for listening to this Medea podcast. For more information about our continuing medical education programs, please visit our website at medeaacademy.com.